My wife said, "Go ahead and leave. You'll realize you need me and come crawling back." After one last disrespectful argument, I simply said, "We'll see," packed my bags, and moved to another state for a better job. A few weeks later, my phone rang. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The dining room smelled like pot roast and old furniture polish. Evan Holloway sat at the far end of the table, his fork working mechanically through mashed potatoes that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. Around him, voices overlapped. Renee's mother, Gloria, holding court about something that happened at her book club. Renee's father, Daniel, grunting agreement between bites. Renee's sister, Amanda, scrolling through her phone while half listening. Sunday dinners at the in-laws' house in Millbrook, Ohio. A tradition Evan had learned not to resist. The house itself was a relic from the 70s, wood paneling on the walls, brass fixtures that needed polishing, carpet that held decades of embedded smells. The dining table seated 8, but somehow always felt crowded with just 5 people. Framed family photos lined the walls, none of them including Evan despite 3 years of marriage. "Don't you think so, Evan?" Gloria's voice cut through his thoughts. He looked up. "Sorry, what?" Renee sighed beside him, not looking away from her phone. "Mom asked if you agreed that the new manager at the grocery store is rude." "I haven't met them," Evan said. Gloria smiled, but her eyes stayed flat. "Well, of course you wouldn't notice. You're always so focused on your own world." Renee nodded, finally glancing up. "He doesn't really pay attention to local stuff." Evan set his fork down carefully. He'd never claimed to know anything about the grocery store manager. He'd never been asked. But somehow, in this house, his silence became evidence of personal failure. "How's work, Evan?" Daniel asked, not because he cared, but because the silence had stretched too long. "It's good," Evan said. "Actually, there's an opportunity coming up." He got another warning about his timesheets. Renee cut in, her tone light, almost amused. Evan turned to look at her. "No, I didn't. You said they sent you an email." "They sent everyone an email about the new system. It wasn't a warning." Renee shrugged, dismissive. "Same thing. It wasn't the same thing. It wasn't even close." But around this table, facts bent to fit whatever narrative Renee built. And her family never questioned her version. Amanda finally looked up from her phone. "What kind of opportunity?" Evan hesitated. He'd planned to discuss this with Renee first, privately, before mentioning it to anyone else. But the question hung there, and refusing to answer would only make him look evasive. "There's an opening in Washington State," he said. "The Yakima Valley plant. Same company, different location. It's a supervisor position, planning and coordination instead of just maintenance." "Washington." Gloria's eyebrows lifted. "That's across the country." "It's a good position," Evans said. "Better pay, stable hours, room for advancement." Renee laughed, not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh that made her father smirk into his water glass. "You're not moving to Washington," she said. "I was hoping we could discuss it," Evans said carefully. "There's nothing to discuss." Renee set her phone down, giving him her full attention now. "You can barely handle changes at your current job. Remember when they switched your shift and you spent 3 weeks complaining about it?" "I adjusted," Evans said, "after I helped you make a schedule, which you still use." Renee looked at her mother. "He needs structure. Always has." That word again. Needs. Like he was a child requiring supervision. Evan worked maintenance planning at the Millbrook manufacturing plant. He'd held the position for 5 years, earned his certifications through night classes, handled the coordination of equipment repairs and preventive maintenance across 3 buildings. He paid half the mortgage on the house he shared with Renee. When the water heater broke last winter, he replaced it himself. When Renee quit her job at the insurance company, her 3rd job in 2 years, he covered the bills without complaint. But at this table, none of that mattered. "Moving out west is a big decision," Daniel said, his tone suggesting the decision had already been made, especially for someone who's never lived outside Ohio. "I'm 32, Evans said. "I think I can handle a move." "Can you?" Gloria asked. The question sounded genuine, but her expression said otherwise. Renee reached over and patted Evan's hand, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt patronizing. "It's sweet that you want to try new things. But let's be realistic. You'd hate it out there. Different climate, no family support, starting over with new people. She squeezed his hand. You're not built for that kind of uncertainty. The conversation moved on. Amanda mentioned something about her boyfriend. Gloria launched into a story about the neighbor's fence. Evan sat quietly, his appetite gone, his jaw tight. He'd been handling uncertainty his entire life. What he couldn't handle was being managed like an incompetent employee in his own marriage. After dinner, while Renee and Amanda cleared the table, Gloria cornered Evan in the living room. She stood close, her voice low and confidential. Renee knows you better than anyone, she said. You've always needed guidance, Evan. That's not a criticism, it's just the truth. Some people are leaders. Some people need direction. She touched his arm. She's trying to help you. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Evan looked at his mother-in-law, at her carefully styled hair and her pressed blouse and her expression of practiced concern. He wondered if she'd ever questioned Renee's version of their marriage, or if she'd accepted it wholesale because it confirmed what she already believed. I appreciate the advice, Evan said, his voice neutral. He didn't appreciate it, but saying so would only start an argument that Renee would join, and he'd end up defending himself against both of them while Daniel watched from his recliner like it was a mildly interesting television program. The drive home was silent. Renee drove. She always drove when they visited her parents, claiming Evan got too tense behind the wheel, and Evan watched the darkened streets of Millbrook slide past the window. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone. The river cut through the middle, dividing the old factories from the residential areas. Main Street had 3 churches, 2 bars, and a hardware store that had been run by the same family for 60 years. People grew up here, got married here, raised kids here, and never seriously considered leaving. Evan had thought he wanted that kind of stability. Now it felt like drowning in slow motion. Their house was a split-level built in the 80s, with beige siding and a narrow driveway. Renee parked and went inside without waiting. Evan followed, already bracing for the conversation he knew was coming. She was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed, leaning against the counter. The light above the sink cast shadows under her eyes, making her look older than 30. So she said, Washington. I wanted to talk to you first, Evan said, before telling them. But you didn't. Your sister asked. I answered honestly. Renee shook her head. You embarrass me, making it sound like we're planning some big move, without even discussing it with me first. We haven't discussed it because you shut down every conversation about my career, Evan said. He kept his voice level, but something in his chest had gone tight. Every time I mention an opportunity or a change, you tell me why I can't handle it. Because you can't. She said it simply, like stating a fact. You're good at what you do here, Evan. You know the people, you know the systems. Why would you throw that away to start over somewhere you'd probably hate? Maybe I want to find out. No. Renee's tone sharpened. You want to run away because my family doesn't worship you. Because they see through your act. What act? The competent adult act. She pushed off the counter, moving closer. You need me, Evan. You need structure and reminders and someone to keep you on track. That's not an insult. It's just who you are. And that's fine. But don't pretend you're ready for some big independent adventure when we both know you'd fall apart within a month. Evan stared at her. They'd had arguments before about money, about her jobs, about whose turn it was to call the plumber. But this felt different. This felt like she'd been holding these thoughts for years and had finally decided to say them out loud. I want respect in my own house, he said quietly. Renee laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to be babied and praised for doing basic adult things. I'm sorry reality doesn't match your fantasy. I want a partner, not a supervisor. Then be someone who doesn't need supervising. The words hung in the air between them. Outside, a dog barked. A car passed on the street. Inside the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed, and Evan felt something shift in his chest, something that had been bending under pressure finally giving way. Go ahead and leave, Renee said, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. Pack your bags, drive west, take the job. You'll realize within 2 weeks that you need me, that you can't function without someone managing your life. And you'll come crawling back, just like you always do. Always? Evan asked. When have I ever left before? Emotionally, every time we fight, you retreat into your little wounded silence until I fix it, until I tell you what to do next. She smiled, and it looked pitying. You're not built to be alone, Evan. Neither am I. That's why we work. I guide, you follow. It's been that way from the start. Evan looked at his wife, at her tired eyes and her crossed arms and her absolute certainty that she knew him better than he knew himself. He thought about their wedding 3 years ago, small and rushed, because Renee's parents had insisted it was time. He thought about the apartment they'd shared first, where Renee had rearranged his things to be more organized, and he'd let it happen because it seemed easier than arguing. He thought about the house they'd bought together, the mortgage they split, the life they'd built on a foundation that now seemed built on her terms entirely. We'll see, he said. Renee blinked. What? We'll see if you're right. Evan turned and walked toward the stairs. Where are you going? To pack. He heard her follow him up to their bedroom, heard her voice rising in pitch and volume as she demanded to know what he thought he was doing, where he thought he was going, how he planned to survive without her. He didn't answer. He pulled his duffel bag from the closet, the one he used for work trips, and started filling it with clothes. You're being ridiculous, Renee said. You're not actually leaving. Evan packed his work uniforms, his casual clothes, his toiletries from the bathroom. He took his laptop and his certification document from the drawer. He left the wedding photos on the dresser. Evan, stop. We're having a conversation. We're done having conversations, he said. He zipped the bag and slung it over his shoulder. I'm done being managed. Renee's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession. Disbelief, anger, something that might have been fear. If you walk out that door, don't expect me to be here when you come back. Evan looked at her for a long moment. 3 years of marriage. 5 years of dating before that. 8 years of his life spent trying to earn respect from someone who decided from the start that he didn't deserve it. Okay, he said. He walked past her, down the stairs, out to his truck parked in the driveway. He heard her calling after him, her voice tight with fury, demanding he come back inside and talk like an adult. He started the engine. The dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m. He drove. The highway stretched west through darkness. Evan kept his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes on the broken white lines that divided the lanes. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't call anyone. He just drove, putting miles between himself and Millbrook with every passing minute. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Renee calling. He didn't answer. It buzzed again. A text this time. You're being childish. Then another. My parents are right about you. And another. Fine. Leave. See how far you get. Evan silenced the phone and kept driving. He thought about the first time he'd met Renee's family. They'd been dating 6 months, and she'd insisted on bringing him to Sunday dinner. Gloria had asked questions about his job, his family, his plans. Every answer he gave seemed to disappoint her in some subtle way. By dessert, he felt like he'd failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. Later, in the car, Renee had said, "Don't worry. Mom's protective. She just needs to see that you're stable." Evan had spent the next 5 years trying to prove his stability. And somehow, every achievement became evidence that he couldn't have done it without Renee's help. When he got promoted to planning, Renee told people she'd helped him prepare for the interview. When he fixed the basement flooding after a storm, she told her family she'd researched the solutions. When he completed his maintenance management certification, she threw a party and gave a toast about how proud she was that he'd finally taken her advice to pursue advanced training. The truth didn't matter, only her version of events. He remembered the time he'd tried to set a boundary. It was small. He'd asked Renee not to discuss their finances with her mother. They'd been arguing about whether to refinance the house, and Evan had wanted to make the decision privately, as a couple. Renee had called him controlling. Then she called her mother anyway. 2 days later, Gloria had shown up at their house with advice about managing money. She brought printouts and pamphlets. She'd sat Evan down at his own kitchen table and explained, very patiently, why his concerns were unfounded and why he needed to trust Renee's judgment on financial matters. When Evan protested, when he tried to explain that he just wanted privacy in his marriage, Gloria had smiled sadly. "Evan," she'd said, "Renee told me you've been unstable lately. Stressed, not thinking clearly. That's why we're here, to help." Unstable. That word had echoed in his mind for weeks afterward. Now, driving through the darkness, Evan realized something. Renee didn't just want control. She needed him to believe he was incapable of functioning without her. She needed him dependent, uncertain, constantly seeking her approval. Because if he ever realized he didn't need her, she'd have nothing left to manage. The highway signs started showing distances to cities he'd never visited. He crossed into Indiana around midnight, his eyes burning, but his mind too alert for sleep. He stopped at a rest area, bought coffee from a vending machine that tasted like hot dirt, and sat at a picnic table under fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered. His phone showed 17 missed calls, 12 texts, all from Renee. He opened his email instead. The message about the Washington position was still there, sent 3 weeks ago. He'd saved it, unsure whether to apply, waiting for the right moment to discuss it with Renee. There would never have been a right moment. He composed a response, said he was interested, asked about next steps, sent it at 1:23 a.m. from a rest stop in Indiana, drinking bad coffee and watching moths batter themselves against the lights overhead. The reply came 6 hours later, when Evan was in Iowa and the sun was rising over flat farmland that stretched to the horizon. They wanted to schedule a phone interview. They could move quickly if he was serious about relocating. Evan was serious. He drove for 2 more days, stopping only for gas and food and brief naps in parking lots. Renee's calls continued. Her texts shifted from angry to confused to accusatory. She accused him of having an affair, of being mentally unstable, of abandoning his responsibilities. She never asked why he left. She never once said she was sorry. The Yakima Valley opened up before him like a promise. Mountains in the distance, orchards spreading across rolling hills, irrigation systems turning circles in the fields. The air smelled different here, dry and sharp, carrying hints of sage and fruit trees. The manufacturing plant sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling complex of buildings and parking lots. Evan arrived 2 hours before his in-person interview, parked in the visitor section, and walked the perimeter to get a feel for the operation. It was bigger than Millbrook's plant, more modern. The equipment looked newer, the buildings better maintained. Through the windows, he could see clean floors and organized workstations. The interview went well. The operations manager, a woman named Patricia Reeves, asked practical questions about maintenance planning, coordination between departments, and how to prioritize repairs during production runs. She didn't ask about his personal life. She didn't question whether he could handle the responsibility. She offered him the job before he left the building. "You can start in 2 weeks," Patricia said. "That enough time to get settled?" "Yes," Evans said. "Thank you." Thank the previous supervisor. He left detailed notes about what the position needs. "We've been scrambling without proper planning for 3 months. You're going to make a lot of people's jobs easier." On the way out, Evan passed the maintenance shop. 3 technicians were working on a pump assembly, tools spread across a bench, troubleshooting a problem together. One of them looked up, nodded at Evan, then returned to the work. No interrogation, no judgment, just acknowledgement and focus. Evan found an apartment that afternoon. It was small, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table. But the windows faced west toward the mountains, and the orchard next door filled the air with apple blossom scent. The landlord asked for first month's rent and a security deposit. Evan wrote the check and got his keys within an hour. He bought an air mattress from a big box store, set it up in the empty bedroom, lay down and stared at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar sounds. Wind through the orchard, distant traffic, irrigation systems clicking on. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe. The work started simple. Evan spent his first week learning the systems, meeting the maintenance crew, reviewing the backlog of pending repairs. The plant ran 3 shifts, and each shift had its own rhythms and personalities. People were polite but cautious at first, waiting to see if the new supervisor would be competent or just another administrator who didn't understand the actual work. Evan knew the work. He'd been doing it for years. He walked the floors, asked questions, listened more than he spoke. When a conveyor belt showed signs of bearing failure, he scheduled the repair for the weekend shutdown instead of waiting for catastrophic failure. When two technicians disagreed about a wiring issue, he pulled the schematics and walked them through the logic until they reached consensus. "You actually know this stuff," one of the technicians said on his third day. "I did this job for 5 years before supervising," Evans said. "Well, it's about time we got someone who speaks the language." By the end of his second week, people had stopped treating him like a visitor. They asked his opinion. They brought him problems to solve. They trusted him. It felt strange. He cooked simple meals in his small kitchen: pasta, chicken, vegetables from the farmer's market downtown. He ate at the table by the window, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. He slept deeply, waking before dawn without an alarm, feeling rested for the first time in months. The apartment stayed mostly empty. He'd ordered a real bed, a couch, basic furniture. But he didn't hurry to make the space look like home. It already felt more comfortable than the house in Millbrook ever had. His phone rang on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after he'd started the job. Renee. He'd been expecting this call. She'd left 18 voicemails since he'd stopped answering, her messages cycling through anger and confusion and wounded pride. He answered. "So," Renee said. Her tone was casual, almost amused. "You done proving your point?" Evan set down the book he'd been reading. "I wasn't proving anything. I left." "Right. Your little rebellion. Very dramatic." She sighed, and he could hear familiar sounds in the background. Her parents' television, Gloria's voice asking who was on the phone. "My parents think you're having some kind of episode. Mom's worried you're going through a breakdown." "That's convenient," Evan said. Renee laughed. "Come home, Evan. This is embarrassing. People keep asking me where you are, and I don't know what to tell them. How long are you planning to keep this up?" "I'm not keeping anything up. I have a job here, an apartment, a life." "For how long?" Her voice hardened slightly. "You're going to last a month out there, maybe 2, and then you'll realize you're miserable and alone and completely in over your head. Just come back now and save us both the trouble." Evan looked out the window at the mountains, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. "I'm not coming back." "Yes, you are. You always do." Renee's voice took on that patient tone she used when explaining something obvious to someone slow. "Remember when you said you were going to start that side business? The consulting thing? You gave up after 3 weeks because you couldn't handle the extra responsibility. Remember when you wanted to switch to second shift because it paid more? You hated it and begged to go back to days. You can't handle change, Evan. You never could." "Maybe that was true," Evan said. "Or maybe I just got tired of fighting you every time I wanted to try something new." "Oh, please. Don't blame me for your limitations." "I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just done." There was a long pause. In the background, he heard Gloria say something, and Renee covered the phone, her muffled response too quiet to make out. When she came back, her tone had shifted again, lighter, almost playful. "Look, I get it. You needed space. You felt pressured. That's fine. Take another week, clear your head, then come home and we'll talk about everything. Fresh start." "I filed for divorce," Evan said. He hadn't planned to tell her yet, but the words came out smooth and certain. "The papers should arrive in a few days." Silence. Then, "You're lying. I spoke to a lawyer last week. I have the case number if you want it." "You wouldn't dare." Her voice had gone sharp, the casual facade cracking. "You don't have the balls to go through with it. You're just trying to scare me." "I'm not trying to do anything except move forward with my life." "Fine." Renee's voice rose. "Run away. Destroy our marriage over some tantrum. See where it gets you. You'll be back within a month, begging me to take you back, and I won't. I'll be done with you." "Okay," Evan said. He ended the call. His hands were steady. His heartbeat was normal. He felt calm in a way that seemed disconnected from the magnitude of what he'd just done. Told his wife of 3 years that he was divorcing her, without anger, without theatrics, without any of the messy emotion he'd expected to feel. Maybe he'd been done with the marriage longer than he realized. Maybe the leaving had just been the final acknowledgement of something that had ended years ago. He returned to his book, made tea, went to bed at 10, and slept through the night. The calls didn't stop. 3 days later, his phone rang before dawn. Renee's sister, Amanda. He let go to voicemail. "Evan, it's Amanda. I don't know what's going on with you and Renee, but you need to call her back. She's really upset. Whatever happened, you guys can work it out. Just call her." Then Renee's mother. "Evan, This is Gloria. I'm very disappointed in you. After everything our family has done for you, this is how you repay us? Renee is heartbroken. The least you could do is have the decency to discuss this like an adult instead of hiding across the country. Then an uncle he'd met exactly twice. Hey, Evan, this is Dale. Look, I don't know what's happening between you and Renee, but marriage is about commitment. You made vows. A man stands by his wife, especially when things get tough. Call her. Work it out. The messages kept coming. Cousins, family friends, even a woman from Renee's book club who felt compelled to share her thoughts on the importance of fighting for relationships. Not one of them asked why he left. Not one of them asked if he was okay. They only asked when he'd return. Evan listened to each voicemail once, then deleted it. He didn't respond. He didn't explain. He didn't defend himself against accusations he hadn't heard directly. After a week, he blocked every number except Renee's. Not because he wanted to hear from her, but because when the divorce papers were served, he needed to be able to document any threats or concerning behavior. His lawyer had advised him to keep one line of communication open, just in case. It was strategic, not hopeful. At work, nobody knew about his personal situation. He kept his focus on the job, on building relationships with the crew, on proving himself through competence rather than conversation. Patricia commented on his attention to detail. The plant manager thanked him for reducing equipment downtime by 30% in his first month. You're fitting in well here, Patricia said during a brief meeting in her office. The crew speaks highly of you. That doesn't always happen quickly. They make it easy, Evans said. They know their jobs. They just needed someone to coordinate and listen. That's exactly what we needed. Keep doing what you're doing. He left her office feeling something unfamiliar. Not pride exactly, but a quiet satisfaction. Like gears clicking into place. Like he was exactly where he should be. His apartment slowly became more livable. He hung curtains, bought a coffee maker, found a used dining table at a yard sale, and refinished it himself in the parking lot on weekends. Small things, but they were his choices. Nobody questioning why he picked that table or whether he really needed new curtains or if he was capable of refinishing wood without supervision. He joined a local gym, started running the trails near the orchard, lost the tension he'd been carrying in his shoulders for years. The divorce papers were served on a Thursday. Evan knew because Renee called 37 times in 2 hours. He didn't answer. He was at work, supervising a major equipment installation, and couldn't take personal calls. We finally checked his phone during lunch. The voicemails were furious. How dare you serve me papers? How dare you? You don't get to just throw away our marriage like it's garbage. Call me right now. I'm not signing anything. You hear me? I'm not signing. My lawyer says you can't force me to divorce you. You'll have to go through a trial, and it's going to cost you everything. Is that what you want? Fine. Ignore me. Be a coward. But you're not getting out of this marriage without a fight. Evan forwarded all the messages to his lawyer and went back to work. That night, she called again. He answered, putting her on speaker while he cooked dinner. You're destroying our image, Renee said. Her voice was tight, controlled fury wrapped in measured words. Do you understand that? People are asking questions. My family is humiliated. I have to explain to everyone why my husband abandoned me. You can tell them the truth, Evans said. He stirred pasta, the water boiling steady and calm. That we weren't compatible. That I wanted respect, and you wanted control. That it wasn't working. That's not the truth. The truth is you're having some kind of crisis and making terrible decisions and ruining both our lives. She paused. I talked to your mother. Evan went still. What? I called her. Told her what you're doing. She's worried about you, Evan. She thinks you're making a mistake. His mother lived in Florida, remarried, distant but cordial. He spoke to her maybe once a month. She knew about the marriage problems vaguely, but hadn't gotten involved. Hearing that Renee had pulled her into this made his jaw tighten. Don't call my mother again, he said. Why? Because you don't want her to know what kind of person you really are? How you just gave up on us without even trying. I tried for 3 years, Evan said. I tried to be good enough for you, for your family. I tried to prove I was capable and stable and deserving of basic respect. And nothing was ever enough. So I stopped trying. You stopped caring, you mean? You gave up on us. No, I gave up on being someone I'm not. Renee laughed, sharp and bitter. You think you're some kind of hero in this story? The brave husband escaping his terrible wife? Let me tell you what you really are, Evan. You're a coward who runs away when things get difficult. You always have been. And wherever you are right now, whatever job you think you've got, you're going to fail. Because that's what you do when nobody's there to keep you on track. Evan drained the pasta, plated it, added sauce. His hand stayed steady. I spoke to a lawyer, he said calmly. I filed paperwork. I have records, messages, emails, financial decisions you made without telling me. Bank statements showing the money you took from our joint account last year. Documentation of every time you involve your family in our private matters after I asked you not to. The silence stretched. You wouldn't dare, she said finally, but her voice had changed. Uncertain now. I already did. Evan sat down with his dinner. I documented everything. If you want to fight this divorce, go ahead. But it's not going to play out the way you think. You're bluffing. Am I? He took a bite of pasta. You can find out if you want. Or you can sign the papers and we can both move on. She hung up. Evan finished his dinner in silence. Then he pulled out the folder his lawyer had given him. Copies of all the documentation he'd gathered over the past month. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals. Email threads where Renee made major financial decisions alone. Screenshots of texts where she discussed their private issues with her family despite his explicit request for privacy. He hadn't been bluffing. He'd been preparing. The tone changed overnight. Renee called the next morning before dawn, crying. Full sobs, broken words, apologies tumbling over each other. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any of it. I was angry and hurt, and I said terrible things. Please, Evan, please just talk to me. He let her talk. Didn't interrupt. Didn't reassure her. I've been under so much stress, she continued. My family keeps pressuring me, asking what happened, and I didn't know what to say. I reacted badly. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't give up on us. I'm not giving up, Evans said. I already gave up. Months ago. I just didn't tell you. That's not fair. It's honest. She cried harder. You don't love me anymore? I don't know. Maybe I do. But love isn't enough when there's no respect. I respect you. No, you don't. You manage me. You dismiss me. You make me feel incompetent in my own life. That's not respect. I'll change. I promise. Just give me another chance. I already gave you 3 years of chances. More tears. More apologies. She blamed stress. She blamed her parents. She blamed her upbringing. She blamed everything except herself. Evan listened to it all with a strange detachment, like watching a play where he knew all the lines. Come home, she said finally. Just for a weekend. We can talk face to face. Work things out like adults. No, please. Signing the papers is the adult thing to do, Renee. Letting go. She hung up on him. The calls continued for another week. Some angry, some tearful, some attempting negotiation. Renee offered compromises. They could move to Washington together. She'd find a job there. They'd start fresh. Or he could come back to Ohio and she'd be more supportive. Or they could separate for 6 months and try again later. Evan said no to everything because none of it addressed the real problem. She wanted him back on her terms, under her control, with the power balance restored to what it had been. And he was done living that way. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, his lawyer called with information that changed everything. Your wife's lawyer contacted us, the lawyer said. Apparently, Renee had been discussing moving back in with her parents several months ago, before you left. We have emails between her and her mother about preparing the guest room for her return. Evans sat down slowly. She was planning to leave, planning to move out, yes. The emails discussed logistics, timing, and her intention to file for divorce herself once she'd secured her living situation with her parents. When were these emails sent? March through May of this year. Evan had left in June. The job opportunity in Washington had come up in May. While he'd been trying to discuss the position with Renee, trying to include her in the decision, try and make their marriage work, she'd been planning to end it herself. She just wanted to do it on her timeline, with her narrative under her control. The emails are fairly detailed, his lawyer continued. Her mother was advising her to wait until after the summer, to make sure you were committed to staying in Ohio before she pulled the trigger, as she put it. Evan felt something cold and clarifying settle in his chest. Not anger, just clarity. She'd never intended to move forward with him. She'd been planning the end while pretending everything was fine. And when he'd left first, when he'd taken control of the situation himself, she'd panicked. Not because she loved him and wanted him back, but because she'd lost control of the story. Can we use this? Evan asked. Potentially, if she contests the divorce and claims abandonment or emotional distress. These emails establish that she'd been considering divorce herself. It undermines any argument that your leaving was unexpected or damaging. Send me copies, Evan said. I want to see them. He read the emails that evening. Gloria's words were careful, calculated. Make sure he doesn't suspect anything. Keep things stable. Once you're ready, we'll have everything in place for you to come home. Renee's responses were eager, relieved. I can't do this much longer. Living with him is exhausting. He's so needy and requires constant validation. I'll be so much happier once I'm back with you and Dad. Needy. That word again, wielded like a weapon. Evan closed the laptop and sat in his quiet apartment, listening to the evening sounds of the orchard. Wind through leaves, birds settling in for night, irrigation systems clicking off. She'd called him needy while planning to move back in with her parents. She'd called him incapable while secretly preparing to leave. She'd accused him of abandoning her while she'd been counting down the days until she could leave him first. The hypocrisy was almost impressive. He forwarded the emails to himself, then to his phone. He didn't need them for the divorce. His lawyer had them secured, but he wanted them accessible, just in case. Renee called again the next morning. Her voice was different now, smaller, uncertain, stripped of the confidence that had always made her seem untouchable. Evan, she said, we need to talk. We are talking about the divorce, about everything. She paused, and he could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. My lawyer told me, about the emails. Evan said nothing. I can explain, she continued. It wasn't, I was confused. I was unhappy. I was venting to my mom. That's all it was. I wasn't seriously planning anything. The emails are pretty specific, Renee. I was frustrated. You were always talking about changes and opportunities, and I just wanted stability. I needed my mom to understand why I was stressed. But I never actually planned to leave you. I swear. Evan almost laughed. Almost. You discussed preparing the guest room. You talked about timing. You used the phrase, pull the trigger. That's not venting. That's planning. You're taking it out of context. What context makes it okay? He kept his voice calm, neutral. You were planning to divorce me, while I was trying to save our marriage. While I was discussing opportunities with you, try to include you in decisions, trying to make things work, you were planning to leave. I wasn't. You were. And that's fine. You're allowed to want a divorce. But don't call me a coward for leaving when you were planning to do the same thing. Silence. Then, quietly, it's different. Ow! Because I was thinking about it properly. Making plans. Being responsible. You just ran away on impulse. I made a decision and followed through, Evan said. Just like you were planning to. The only difference is I did it first. More silence. He could hear her breathing, could almost feel her mind working, searching for an angle that would regain some control over the narrative. Look, she said finally, maybe we were both unhappy. Maybe we both needed space. But we can still fix this. We can acknowledge we made mistakes and start over. No. Why not? Because I don't want to. Because I'm happier here than I ever was in Millbrook. Because every day I wake up and don't have to defend myself or prove myself or justify myself to anyone. That's worth more than whatever we had. What we had was a marriage. What we had was a power imbalance you called a marriage. Her voice hardened again. You think you're so enlightened now. So self-aware. But you're the same person you always were, Evan. Weak. Dependent. Needing someone to tell you what to do. You'll realize that soon enough. Maybe, Evan said. Or maybe I'll keep thriving without you and prove you wrong. Either way, it's not your concern anymore. He ended the call. His hands were steady. His chest felt light, like setting down weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of his body. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Renee contested it first, filing motions that claimed abandonment and emotional distress. Her lawyers submitted statements from Gloria and Daniel. both swearing that Evan had been unstable and erratic, that he'd left without warning, that Renee had been blindsided and devastated. Evan's lawyer responded with the emails, with bank records showing Renee's unauthorized withdrawals, with documentation of every boundary Evan had tried to set and Renee had ignored, with testimony from Evan's supervisor at the Millbrook plant confirming his competence and reliability as an employee. The judge read everything, asked pointed questions about the timeline of events, looked at Renee skeptically when she claimed she'd never seriously considered divorce. These emails suggest otherwise, the judge said. The case settled out of court 2 weeks later. Clean split of assets. No alimony. No contested property. Just an ending. Evan signed the papers in his lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon. His hand didn't shake. He felt nothing except mild relief, like finishing a long project that had dragged on too long. "You're free," his lawyer said, shaking his hand. "Good luck out there." "Thank you." Evan walked out into Washington's sunshine. The mountains were clear, snow melting from the peaks as summer deepened. He drove back to his apartment, made dinner, ate slowly while reading a book about equipment maintenance protocols. His phone stayed silent. No calls from Renee. No texts from her family. No voicemails from concerned relatives who'd never actually been concerned about him. Just silence. Clean and complete. Work continued. The plant ran smoothly. The maintenance crew trusted his judgment. Patricia mentioned a possible promotion to operations coordinator if he was interested. Evan said he'd think about it. He wasn't in a hurry anymore. He joined a community rec league for softball, made acquaintances, not quite friends yet, but people who knew his first name and invited him to barbecues and didn't need to know his history. He dated briefly, a woman from the plant office who liked hiking and had a laugh that reminded him spring rain, but it fizzled naturally after a month, and they parted on good terms. He bought a kayak and spent weekends on the river, paddling slowly, watching hawks circle overhead. He learned what it felt like to be enough, exactly as he was, without constant performance or proof. Months passed. Fall arrived, painting the orchard in shades of rust and gold. The apple harvest drew workers from across the region. Evan helped his landlord repair irrigation pipes in exchange for fresh fruit, and spent evenings making applesauce that filled his apartment with cinnamon smell. He thought about Renee sometimes. Not often, and not with anger. Just occasional curiosity about where she was, what she was doing. He'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd moved back in with her parents, just as she'd planned. That she told everyone Evan had abandoned her cruelly. That she was dating someone local, someone who fit better with her family's expectations. Good, Evan thought. She found what she wanted. And so had he. One evening in October, after the first frost had touched the valley, Evan drove to the river that ran through Yakima. Not the same river that cut through Millbrook. This one was wider, faster, fed by mountain snowmelt. He parked at a small riverside park and walked to the water's edge. The sun was setting, turning the sky into layers of purple and pink and orange. Families walked past, parents with children, couples holding hands, an old man feeding ducks from a paper bag. Evan sat on a bench and watched the water move. He thought about how Renee had believed family meant strength in numbers. How she'd wielded her parents and siblings and extended relatives like weapons, using consensus to overwhelm any dissent. She'd never understood that numbers don't equal strength, that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stand alone. He thought about the life he'd built here, the apartment that felt like home, the job where people respected his expertise, the quiet evenings reading by the window, the weekends on the river, the simple satisfaction of making his own choices without having to defend them. It wasn't a dramatic life. He hadn't become someone new or extraordinary. He'd just become himself, without interference, without judgment, without constant evaluation against someone else's narrow standards. That was enough. More than enough. The sun dipped below the mountains, leaving the sky glowing. Evan stood, stretched, walked back to his truck. He had work tomorrow. Equipment inspections scheduled for the morning, a meeting with the electrical team after lunch. Normal things. Good things. He drove home through the darkening valley, past orchards that had given up their fruit for the season, past houses with lights coming on as families settled in for the night. His apartment was waiting, small and simple and entirely his own. Evan parked, climbed the stairs, unlocked his door. Inside, he made tea, put on music, opened a book he'd been meaning to finish. The radiator clicked on as the temperature dropped. Outside, the orchard rustled in the wind. Renee had told him he'd come crawling back, that he needed her, needed structure, needed someone to manage his life. She'd been wrong, not because Evan had become someone different, but because he'd finally become exactly who he'd always been, capable, stable, and strong enough to walk away from people who couldn't see it. He'd learned something important in this strange, difficult year, something Renee and her family would never understand. Strength isn't proving yourself to people who've already decided you're weak. Strength is knowing when to walk away alone and never return. Evan sipped his tea, turned the page, and kept reading.